Hit
Well,
record and say, welcome everybody. My name is Mina Jane. I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. I'm very thrilled to be here with Piper Huguley, who I've been reading. I did say that right, didn't I? Huguley. Yes.
you did.
Who I've been reading since, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget the name, the tea book.
Oh, sweet tea.
Sweet tea, sweet tea. It's
Hmm.
been a while, but I love that book. And
Great,
so,
great.
as a romance reader, I was just like, oh, I love this. This is amazing. So, anyways, when I was in touch with Piper for something else, and she said that she could do a talk with me, I kind of like screamed for a while. So, we won't go into that just right now. But before we get to all of my fangirling, which will immediately stop, I would like to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library for supporting all of our programming. We could not do all this fun stuff without them. Also, Piper allowed us to partner with other libraries for this program. And as you all know, when libraries work together, we make magic. So we made this magical program. And so I'd like to welcome, of course, the patrons from Ashland and fans of Piper who found us on social media, but also patrons from Andover, Bedford, Hanover, Hopedale, Maynard, Middleton, Needham, Norwell, Seekonk, Tewksbury, Wareham, Woburn, and Rentham.
Well, all of those good English names.
I know, Massachusetts. What can you say?
That's awesomeness. Yes.
Yep, we have a lot of fun up here. So, anyways, those libraries are fantastic, as are all libraries, and help us bring us here. So, also important is you can buy Piper's books from Aesop's Fables, signed by Bookplate. As you know, signed books are gold. And Aesop's Fable is a wonderful independent bookstore right in Holliston, next door to Ashland. So I'll put the link in the chat for that eventually. But Piper and I are just going to be talking for the next hour, and I will be happy to ask any of the questions that you have for her. So please put those in the Q&A, and I will, like I said, ask her. If you put something in the chat, a question, I might catch it, but it's more likely I'll catch it in the Q&A. If you want to just chat with each other, feel free in the chat. So Piper Huguley is an amazing writer started out with romance, like I said, with Sweet Tea, and then has moved on to historical fiction. Stories that we were just talking about a little while ago are just not known and that we're not aware of, and that could have been lost to time if somebody like Piper had not picked up the pen and wrote their stories. So I'm really thrilled, Piper, that you're here and that you've made that move into something that I find so interesting and fascinating and needed. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, because my introductions tend to be lame, and then tell us about, in her own design, your most latest book, by her own design, your latest book that came out last year, but is still incredibly relevant.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Mina. I really appreciate visiting with you and all of these, we'll say, Englishly named Massachusetts library and patrons. Libraries rock. They have been a rock for me all of my life, even as a young nerd. What would I do on Saturday but get on the bus and go to when I was growing up in Pittsburgh, typically the Squirrel Hill branch of Pittsburgh's libraries, and spend hours there. So thank you very much for hosting me. I've actually been writing historically some time. Sweet Tea is my more like my traditional publishing debut. But prior to that, I had independently published 2 historical romance series based on a sort of a segment of unknown Black history. One series is based around the Great Migration, which is technically the largest internal migration in the United States history. It's the migration that explains how the Black population, approximately 50 years after the end of enslavement, moved from the South to the North and the West. So that's one series that I have called Migrations of the Heart. And then my other historical romance series focused on the development of historically Black colleges and universities that began to happen just after the Civil War. And my fictitious, I call it my fictitious HBCU, which was much in the line of how the college has developed a teachers and preachers school. That is the two professions that Black people at the time were permitted to allow to be part of. And so that sort of planted a stake in the ground in terms of historical romance. So my writing of the biographical historical fiction about Ann Lowe, and by her own design, was intended to launch what I call 2.0 of my historical writing. That is to focus more intensively on unknown Black women figures in history who have not been known, or maybe don't have the scholarly acceptance via a scholarly biography or something like that, but that historical fiction can play a role in terms of shining a light on these figures so that they can get that kind of wider spread scholarly acceptance for their accomplishments. So
you are actually a professor, right?
Yes, I am. That's the day job.
Literature professor.
Yes.
And so this is just, I mean, you just, I mean, this is
I'm deeply nerdy. Yes.
Yeah, this is just like it was gonna be, you were gonna be a writer. But were you always, like, truly, were you always gonna be a writer? Like, when you were a kid, was that the path you thought you were gonna take?
That's the path I thought I was going to take. Yeah, when we first moved to our new neighborhood, when I was not able to go to Squirrel Hill Library anymore, and the bus, we moved to a different Pittsburgh suburb, and so I had a different library I had to take up, or whatever. I ran at that time, you know how this works. When you had a phone, you got charged per call. I ran up my parents' phone bill one summer doing research for my royal romance called The President's Daughter and the King's Wife.
Wow.
And you know how it is when you move into a new house, you don't need any additional expenses. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you don't need your 12-year-old running up the bill, trying to figure out how, and this was prior to Charles and Diana. So I'm aging myself, but that is how I am. Trying to figure out how a royal wedding would happen, what I had to do research or whatever. And when my mother gets the phone bill, she's like, "And what is this? Oh my gosh!"
I love it.
Yeah, but she wasn't mad. She was like, "Oh, okay, you were doing research. Okay, let somebody know." But I was getting all these stacks of mail, and it was like, "Oh, this is thrilling."
You were
like
12?
research.
And you were 12 years old.
Yeah, writing a novel. Yeah. So, and I didn't realize at the time that was like a hot romance trope, like royal romance. I was like actually doing the thing.
That's so funny because we had a program with Tracy Livesey.
Tracy and I have the same editor. Yes.
Oh my gosh. And she said that book had been in her head long before Harry and Meghan. So I just thought that was a hoot. So so what was your actual passion other than writing? Did you know that you wanted to write romance, or did you have a bent towards historical books?
Yeah, well, the historical thing didn't hit me until after some time. It just seems like this thing that was always a sub thing with me. Like when I was a little kid, it was time to be Halloween. I was always somebody historical. And my mother had this one pattern that she used to sew for me. It was like a pilgrim and then Betsy Ross, and you shift a couple pieces and those other things, whatever. But then one year the dreaded development happened, well, I guess it wasn't dreaded to me because I was so young. I didn't know it was coming. It was like slap me upside the head, I was like 10, I was like some extremely young little baby child with like a huge rack, that seemingly developed overnight. So she couldn't use the pattern anymore, right? So then she figured out something else. And that was the year I was Laura Ingalls Wilder. So I was always, yeah, exactly. I was Laura Ingalls Wilder for Halloween when I was 10. And she made me a sunbonnet and I perched it upon my afro. I had afro, then she had to pull it down tight so that, it wouldn't spring up.
I just snorted. I'm sorry. I can just see it.
Yes, oh, but my mother is such a supportive parent. She could have told child, what is wrong with you or whatever. She just went and sewed the sunbonnet and made a little dinner pail for me. And I had my little books like I was going to teach school, just like in this Happy Golden Years. And
Oh, so did you ever wear a Halloween costume of an historically Black person?
hey, no. And this is like one of the things about why you need these kinds of stories, because if you don't have these role models presented to, younger children, the only things that they can think about being, or at least it was in my head at that particular point in time, was, an enslaved person. So, it can't be that. So then it has to be this other figure that I'm shown, in terms of being that, it's great. Oh, I see my cousins here, one of my family members. She knows how great my mother was. So yeah, even she herself as a young child, my mother was always very, gathering around the younger cousins and doing things with them and stuff like that. So she knows too. In terms of that. But yeah, it's like you don't know. And that's what's so great now for these younger girls, because they see all the things they can be. I get all kinds of photos of young Ann Lowe's, for Halloween and stuff. And that's what's really cool in terms of that. So the two children's books that exist by her own design, which Parents Magazine said is suitable for ages 12 and up. Great. I love it. That's what it's for. Right. For that.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna go back a little bit again though and ask about did you feel like the romance was the most safe path for you to get into publishing, or is that just where your head
yes, that's why. That's why. The safest path for a woman to try to establish publishing aspect. And really for the historical part, my point in terms of as a professor, one of the things that I do as a from the perspective of just trying to take the temperature of my students is to ask what they're reading. And so at one point in time, around 2010s, I was getting a lot of responses of Zane. Zane's great. It's fitting right in there with, who you are in college, finding your boo and, snuggling up with them and all of that. That's all cool, right? But also let's look at like some historical things, whatever. So at that point, a lot of ensuring that my students were getting a certain amount of history, things they may not have known when I was talking about the literature in the classroom and having to provide that backdrop of history before I could teach the literature. My whole thought was, well, what if I could write something that would be fun and easy for them to read, that, introduced a different approach to love. It's like the 180 degrees from Zane, the other side, in terms of what in the South at least known as courtship, in terms of that. So that's why I did those early series. My students did inform my approach. So there were several things that were happening there to converge in terms of that.
But your books, and again, I'm gonna say in the back, like there wasn't a lot of romance written for or by Black authors. I mean, at that time, the only one I can remember really was Beverly Jenkins. And, so when you started coming out with your romances, and like I said, we were talking earlier about Vanessa Riley and a few others. It was like a whole swell, and it didn't feel safe. It didn't feel like that the publishers were behind you. Did you have that sense?
Oh my God, those books are independently published by me because I could not get. I was agent poison.
Yeah.
I once chased an agent from me talking to her about a historical idea where she had her cards in her hand. She was holding them out to giving them to other people. I said my idea. She had them in her hand and she put them in her purse and got away from me. I haven't seen her since. That it was not happening. And it's Black historical romance, I think you mean, because on the contemporary side, there's never been, you know, a shortfall that whether it's independently published or the traditional be more willing to look at contemporary romance of well-known authors like Kwana Jackson, Farrah Rashan, Jamie Wesley, some who are my friends, in terms of the things that they were doing then. But yeah, in terms of the historical milieu, Beverly Jenkins, there were early on when she first came out, there were a few more in the late 90s. Sort of that they were singular titles that some of the other Black romance authors were doing. But the person who kept on going with it was Beverly Jenkins. You have Shirley Halestock, who has won, Gail Gunn, who has won. Yeah, these are these very singular titles that at one point, particularly in terms of romance history, thinking about Vivian Stevens and her the earliest work in terms of bringing those people on board. There was an early attempt that lasted maybe a couple of years, but the encouragement beyond that, it's hard to keep going. It really is. It's very difficult to keep going, especially when and if you have a particular audience that's not seemingly encouraging.
And yet you have become very popular because those books were needed and wanted. So am I correct in saying that you became a professor before you became a published writer?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Okay. And so is that because you weren't ready to publish yet, or you weren't getting the opportunities to publish yet?
Well, I had a son too. So there was like a sort of like where I had been writing creatively. If I had this memory of going to workshop like the month that he was born, and I was hugely pregnant. And then I shook my head and it was 10 years later. And
I have those same
like,
memories only without writing.
Right. I was like, okay, well, now he's running off to his little, you know, at that time he was going to football practice. And I was like, I guess I better get back to it then, you know, kind of thing. So that was really more the reason to explain, you know, why the professoring came first in terms of it feeding me and all, you know, stuff. Okay. And then of course it's not, you know, as a professor, you have to put things out and publish and all this other kind of stuff. And even though my novels are not seen as scholarship, even though I feel like they should be, but you know, it's seen as that. It, you know, it does give a certain look like, oh my gosh, you're productive and da da da. And my whole thing also about being a professor was always about sharing public information, the information I'm doing in the classroom, to a certain extent, that it also should be more broadly shown. I mean, because this whole thing with what Time Magazine a couple of years ago called the History Wars, my goodness, I've been doing that for years. It's just a big thing now. But in 2014, when I was attempting to publish my historical romance series about the historically Black college and university, and it was an entry in what Amazon used to do in the author breakthrough contest they used to have every year. People would like post all kinds of problematic, very critical kinds of things about the book excerpt, and especially the further on it went into different rounds. Every time the rounds got cut and it was still there, you know, people would be coming in and saying, well, that dreaded phraseology, this is not historically accurate. To have a college-educated Black woman coming to the South to teach the formerly enslaved how to read and write. And so it's really, like I said, that kind of attacks that I was getting then back in 2014 or whatever, certainly let me know at that point that there was strong resistance to telling a historical perspective that had not been previously heard before. So very often in these historical, whether it's Facebook groups or whatever, and they want to begin pulling out that phrase, my question always is, whose history are you talking about? Have you thought about the fact that the history that you believe is so deeply factual and ingrained just represents one small part of the historical narrative, that's all you've been seeing is this one small part, and that for whatever other reasons exist, whether they be economic or racism or whatever, you're not seeing all of the history or more perspectives of the history. That's what I knew. It's like, this is what I need to be doing in terms of bringing a fuller perspective. Because the first Black college educated woman graduated from Oberlin in 1862, well before the Civil War, or during the course of the Civil War, and the placing of the Preacher's Promise, which takes place in 1866. So yes, it was historically accurate.
I have so many thoughts about that whole thing, but I'm gonna because, well, I'll just say it is I think that people have blinders on, and people are, are very comfortable with the history that they've been fed. But again, I go back to the fact that your books are bestsellers, and so there is an audience out there that is starving for the kind of books you're writing. So I really, I mean, I certainly appreciate it. I certainly love looking at a deeper vision of what the world looks like. And I think your books really bring that to the fore.
Thank you.
So Sally asks, academics have not traditionally been accepting of romance and historical fiction. Can you talk about the courses you teach and how your work is viewed by your students and colleagues?
My students feel that I am the biggest nut in the world. They're like, that woman is crazy, and we're just gonna sit here and like look at her like she has lost her mind. I mean, to illustrate that, I was teaching Lysistrata yesterday, and people who know Lysistrata know it's filthy dirty.
I'm surprised it hasn't been banned.
Well, I just, when I teach, it's like I just get, I do the whole thing with it. It's like, hey, this is fun. It's a comedy. It's supposed to be over the top and crazy and all that other kind of stuff. So they're not, they're not impressed in terms of this. Not even anything. If it comes around that I talk about it, and people ask me, the whole thing, do you teach your books, whatever? I think me teaching my books is a conflict of interest. The reason that I write the books is for them to go out and do more reading beyond what I assign, because they don't read enough. That's the point. So it's to encourage them to develop a reading habit outside of class. And then, of course, the other bonus of it is to disseminate this knowledge beyond my classroom as well. So yeah, that's nice. Now my colleagues, they probably also think I'm crazy, but they just aren't just a little bit more practiced at keeping that under thing. But I mean, to the benefit of what I'm saying is that it operates more as my side hustle. As I said, it's not the thing that would get me tenure. It's not the thing that will get me the promotion to the next level and all of that other kind of thing. So the sort of the answer to what do my colleagues think about it? Yeah. So
I have other thoughts there, but I'm gonna keep going. So questions are coming in, and I think they're important because I'm really interested in your historical research, because you are finding stories that haven't been told. How difficult was it to find really detailed information about Ann Lowe? It's not hidden, but getting the depth of it, I'm curious about. And so is Beverly, by the way.
Yes, hi. The serendipitous thing about Ann Lowe is that she was born 2 counties from where her contemporary, my paternal great-grandmother, was born. So because of my family history in Eastern Alabama, I knew already a certain way of what her childhood looked like. That, coupled with the fact that I'm a Zora Neale Hurston scholar, and she's part of my dissertation. Zora Neale Hurston's often credited with being with Florida, but she was born in Alabama. Again, not that far from Clayton, Alabama. I think this is this kind of thing in terms of Novels, particularly historical fiction, is telling an emotional truth, getting a certain set of facts and stringing together the story between what I call the factual tent poles of someone's life. And in terms of, again, telling this emotional truth of it. So there is, you're right, a certain amount of historical research and facts. But when we have to think about the fact that due to Jim Crow, a Black woman in the late 19th century, like my paternal great-grandmother, like Ann Lowe, is not going to have a birth certificate. And you have to think about what that means, particularly when you have a question about her age, given the whole child marriage situation that happens in terms of that. So the whole aspect of writing historical fiction about someone who is marginalized, these are aspects of the research that have to be done in an alternative way, using different kinds of sources that may not be primary or secondary or all of that in terms of how I've been trained, right, as an academic, but instead looking at these other aspects like Zora Neale Hurston's life, early life, and my great-grandmother's early life, to begin to get at what is the emotional truth of that upbringing of Ann Lowe's early life, and how can I make that work in terms of engaging story with the facts that we knew, or the things that she told us about her early years, the sort of the very memorable fact of her getting underneath her mother and grandmother's feet and picking up those scraps and making the flowers out of the fabric, for instance. How do you weave that all together? That's what comes together more for historical fiction. For the scholar, for the textile scholar, who I am hoping comes along to write the scholarly biography of her someday, that's for them to do the more footnoted, documented, hardcore things as for that biography, and as well as what they're probably going to come across is the things that they will not be able to find in the records.
But so why didn't you do nonfiction? Why did you choose to make this a historical fiction?
Well, this is an ongoing question for me, and this is probably where, since I cannot have novels stand in for my promotion and tenure and stuff like that, that for me, the questions will come for, why don't we have more Black women biographers, for instance? These are economic questions, to say that receiving the education, the funding, and the time that's needed to be able to do justice to a project like a scholarly biography work of Ann Lowe would require 3 to 5 years of dedicated, focused time, not a year while you're teaching World Lit and Comp at Clark University kind of time. That's why.
I have to ask about that though, because I totally agree with the economic aspect. Is there something about the fact that there's not a lot of primary sources for biographers to, really tap, that makes them feel like they can't tell the story in an accepted way? As you said, as a professor, you asked this of your students, but wouldn't a writer have that same block?
For a fiction writer, no, because you're working on telling the narrative.
No, but nonfiction. Nonfiction.
Well, if you've read Jonathan Eakes' King book, for instance, he's a white writer who wrote about Martin Luther King. He's probably going to win the Pulitzer, probably.
Okay.
You can document it. I've said it here in
We're
terms
recording.
of that. Yeah. The ways, in terms of the way a biographer gets around that, is by doing deep dive research on the circumstances that cause, for example, the Martin Luther King family to be in a particular place and time. As I learned in Stockbridge, Georgia, which is like the place where I used to go shop for my son's diapers at the Walmart. That's where their family farm was. I was freaked out when I learned that. I was like, oh my God, that's where his ancestry was from. So you do that kind of deep dive in terms of talking about their world But Jonathan Eeg is a biographer who's funded by Whiting and all of these other foundations or whatever, and he has time to go and live down there in Stockbridge and investigate with the Historical Society and all the historians down there in Henry County and all that other kind of stuff. And I teach 4 classes with 20 to 25 students who need their papers graded on time. It's not the same thing.
No.
So yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
it is a concern of mine. It is. It really is, in terms of why we don't have more of Black women biographers, and it's a question I'm grappling with. So hopefully, maybe it's something that the answer will come popping up someday for me in terms of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, somebody in the Q&A says, and I agree, like this just totally seems to energize you both, you know, writing, teaching, all of it, the research. How, as a side hustle though, how do you set aside time for writing and research?
Well, the teaching that I do intensively is more through Tuesday through Thursday, so that if things work out the way that I often hope that they do, that I have like Friday to Monday to get a certain number or an amount of words down in terms of that. And now that I have been promoted, that's something, you know, my summers or, you know, I'm tending for them to be more purposeful to an end. So that's how I hopefully will be able to continue to do it. As I said, my other approaches, of course, are to, you know, do the things that I have to do to obtain funding for future projects and stuff that may involve like some more of my time being freed up towards other certain projects, but we'll see how that all works out.
How long did it take you to write the Ann Lowe book, from idea to publication date?
Well, the idea
to handing it in.
Well, when it popped up on Twitter because my editor is one of the things that she was doing, noticing the dearth of historical fiction about Black women's lives, and say, prior to a certain point, you only had less than a handful of these titles, and that she was looking to diversify her lists beyond that. She would see a bit of Black history there and retweet it and said, who would write this novel for me? So this is how my friend Kaya Alderson got her contract for Sisters in Arms, which is about the 688, the Black woman, all Black woman troops who went over to England and relieved the people working there and organized the mails. They said it was going to take them something like a whole year, and it took them 6 months or something incredible. But it freed those men up to go to D-Day.
Oh, wow.
So that, yeah. In terms of that. So she had been known to do that before. And I had known who she was from our encounters in terms of romance and the other romance novelists who were my friends who she had published, etc. So when she retweeted out an article about Ann Lowe, she said, who will write this novel for me? And I went and looked at the article, looked at some other things, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a story. This is a novel. I'd been working on something for years prior to that. But I was like, this is the thing that might be able for me to get my foot in the door to be able to produce more of these stories. I said, this is great. And so I ended up writing up what ended up being the prologue, because I'm nerd enough to have known right away that when I saw her death date, I knew that it was the day after Charles and Diana had gotten engaged. Yeah. Didn't have to look that up. So I wrote that up from the point of view of this old lady who would be wondering what that commission would look like, knowing she wasn't going to get it, but knowing it was going to be one of the biggest bridal commissions of all time, and her reflecting on her feelings of having had one of the biggest bridal commissions of all time as well. And sent it to my agent and said, do not tell Tess I'm on it. Do not give this to anyone else. So from that, in terms of that idea and having to work and rework that proposal a number of times, in terms of when I handed it in, which was January of 21, I tell people it took 7 months to write the book, but that was more like almost 2 years.
Yeah.
Like,
It's so funny that you had said something about serendipity in Ann Lowe and your great grandmother, because I don't. It sounds to me like, especially with the death date and is that you just see things differently. Like I would never put those things together to make a story, and you're like, oh, there it is. So it's just amazing the way that your mind works.
I like my students would say crazy.
Hey, crazy is not a bad thing.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I tell them too.
It's just creative. Donna says, have you seen the Ann Lowe exhibit at the Winterthir Museum? If so, what did you think?
I've not been yet, but I'm going in October. And then my signing there will be in December, because my suggestion to them was like they should give Ann Lowe a 125th birthday party, which is December 12th. So yeah, and besides, I kind of wanted to do that because apparently the Winterthir does quite a thing for Christmas, and I wanted to be there to see that too. So yeah, my signing date is December 6th. It's not been publicly disseminated yet, but I'm going in October to get an early cursory look and to talk with them about how we're going to publicize it and all that other kind of stuff. So I know all about it. I know all about the CBS Saturday morning piece that they did and the articles that they've done. If you saw the dedication page for By Her Own Design, Margaret Powell, who rightfully so is placed at the beginning of the exhibit. This was one of her longtime dreams for Ann Lowe. When I did the research to write the book, it was her thesis that informed a lot of what I did. It was her interviews with Ann Lowe's granddaughter Audrey that helped me as well. All of that, but that Margaret Powell, one of her dreams was the scholarly biography, of course, which we're still hoping for. And this exhibit, this embrace of her as a designer, not a seamstress, but as a full-fledged Black fashion designer, that this exhibit has, I think, hopefully brought embrace to in terms of it. So,
would it be a spoiler for you to tell us how Jackie O chose Ann Lowe to design her dress?
Well, Ann Lowe began her relationship with the family through a cousin, and then she designed Janet Auchincloss's Jackie Bouvier at the time, her second wedding outfit when she married Hugh Auchincloss. So in 1947, so she began a relationship that started then and lasted almost 20 years. With various members of Jackie and her family, between herself, her Deb dress, her sister's Deb dresses, one of the sisters' wedding gowns, Jackie's wedding gown. As I said, I'm a Kennedy aficionado. So when I saw the tweet, I knew in the back of my mind who she was, but I didn't know her life story because, nobody ever put it out there for people to know, who Ann Lowe was. Even for somebody who is Kennedy aficionado. But that something that I always known about Jackie was her sense, her feeling towards the wedding gown, and what compelled me to do a deeper dive into why she felt that way about the wedding gown as well. So
I love that you just don't toss facts in. You're really going for the emotional. What were they thinking and feeling? I love that.
Yeah.
Beverly Beverly asks, have you ever considered writing children's books such as a biography series of Black women? And I always think like maybe those bobble-headed ones, the who they don't seem, I don't know if they seem as hard, but like I definitely think that those have been teaching children in a very fun way for a while.
For a while now. Yeah. Like for instance, Rosa Parks.
Yeah.
There's a ton of children's books about Rosa Parks, but it's only within the past, 7-8 years that we got the two fully formed, fully researched scholarly biographies about Rosa Parks. It's time adults know about these people, I feel.
Totally agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Chandler asks, how has it been publishing? Sounded like you knew them. How has it been publishing and promoting your novels in an industry that doesn't have much push for Black-centered stories and characters?
Yeah, it's been actually, it's been great with this particular book. I think what helped a lot was the Costco pickup in terms of that. Yeah, so it having been in Costco and the Costco connection for that month when it was released, I think did a certain thing in terms of getting attention for it. It technically counts as a book club selection in terms of that. So that did make it easier. I think that's one of the reasons why it's had a little longer legs, I think, in terms of that. Because I was a little worried actually that I wasn't going to have another historical fiction release in the next year, which would be this year, but it'll be actually a little less than 2 years when my next historical fiction comes out. I was a little worried about that, but I think that because these books about these Black women who are unsung, unknown, unheralded have done a certain kind of thing in terms of planting a seed in the conscious mind, in the societal mind about who these women are, that it's okay for it to take a little more time. So it's been great meeting with book clubs and, spreading the word about what I call #Genius Ann Lowe. I love doing it.
Although when we were talking earlier, before the webinar started, you were saying that there's now a push to do less historical fiction in the publishing world. And I was saying, like, we know when that happens, there's going to be like, what's going to get cut first.
Yeah.
So do you see like a diminishing number of books coming out of diverse stories?
Well, it's not going to appear that way next year. It's sort of taking my little unscientific tally amongst my author friends of what's coming out in 2024. As a matter of fact, it's going to seem like, oh my God, you're being barraged across next year, actually, in terms of Black women's stories, etc. It's the after that.
Well, hopefully after 2024, things will be fine.
Yes, hopefully everybody will go out and buy those books, and they'll be like, wait a minute, we made a mistake.
Well, isn't that the truth that if people buy the books, and if libraries buy lots of copies of the books, there's much more likelihood of that author having another book out.
Yes, exactly. And I was gonna say, encourage, do both. Right? It's to do both. You buy the book, you make your request at your local library, and you've done, the things that you need to do to help. Yeah. And review.
And review. Make them real reviews on Amazon, not those bot ones. Albertina says, what was the name of that white author that wrote King?
I think you say his name is E-I-G. Yeah, Jonathan, his first name.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably going to win the Pulitzer for that. He's been nominated already for the National Book Award in nonfiction, and that from that follows a certain kind of broad circuit books. And he wrote a book about Muhammad Ali, and he wrote about so he has the time to.
It's just curious, it's just really curious when now in current times when a white author writes about a not white.
It's not at all curious. It's par for course actually in terms of biography.
Really?
Yeah. If you're looking at any Black subject, usually it will be by a white person. It tends to be more rare that it's by a Black person in terms of biography itself. As I said, for the reasons that I said, they are economic. It is time and it is money that has to be spent, years that have to be spent in terms of developing a biography about someone. And Black people often have to work for a living in terms of not being able to do that.
So we will talk about your next book coming up, but I did want to ask you, aside from that book, because Patty's asking about that next book, but I want to dig into that. Aside from that book, are there other historical women, Black women, that you have your eye on to write about?
Oh, of course. But, I kind of have to play it close to the vest in terms of who they are. Because everybody got a person coming up, so I don't know. I can't say, necessarily. I just can say, I know there are ones who I'm dying to get to, but probably I was like, if my literary star is to rise more, maybe they'll see, oh yeah, she's worthy, let her do it. I think pointedly of Ida B. Wells. I would love to write a historical fiction about her. But her great-granddaughters are very protective of her intellectual property, and justifiably so. That's fine. In terms of that, it's just like I said, hopefully they might consider one day, because she has several great biographies out on her, and some of them are by Black women. But there are certain aspects of her life that I think beg for a dramatic retelling. She wrote her own autobiography actually also, and that's another fun thing. But in terms of, and I say this as an autobiographical scholar, they're leaving things out. They're shaping a story. So again, sort of this perspective that people have about, oh yeah, that's the truth. One of the overarching things, and maybe it's because I'm a romance writer or whatever, is like, where did Ferdinand come from? She never tells us, like, where they met, what the fireworks happened and how or whatever. She just leaves it out because she's Victorian and it's none of your business. But I want to see that scene.
It's so funny. Joe Ellis says, please write about Ida B. Wells Barnett. I've been portraying her life story for over 20 years and met her grandson, Troy Duster, years ago.
Them dusters are protective, honey. I don't know. I would love to. But yeah, we'll see one day. I decided, like, I need to send them a copy of By Her Own Design. See what they have.
Absolutely. Can't hurt, right?
I should do that. Yeah, can't hurt. Exactly.
So I have one question. I guess I want to go back to that question about the Eeg and the King, like that. Do you feel like that book, maybe that book or other books, do justice to the history, or that there would be a different justice to the story and the history if it was written by somebody of that?
Yeah, that's the thing. Now, in his case, I think because I live close to Stockbridge, and there's a certain way in terms of opening my eyes, I know, but I think it's Patty Harrigan, I think is her last name, whatever, who wrote about recently released in August Wilson, the playwright, who is, I'm from Pittsburgh originally. So, I'm very interested in all of that, Pittsburgh history and stuff like that, in terms of the ways she talked about his early years, the way he had experienced his racism, one of the branches that I would visit, which is where he hung out when he stopped going to high school, all of that. Yeah, I see holes. I do. And I would be lying if I didn't say. And some people, oh, well, you just go and get a sensitivity reader and then everything is fine. Well, sensitivity readers, actually, it's more like that. I think that writers want a sensitivity reader to bless the book more than provide correction to the book. So I think sensitivity readers are obtained in order for people to be able to say, we covered that with the person of that background and everything was okay, rather than, yeah.
I guess my question really is about what drives the narrative. So if somebody of not that background is writing that background, there's always that question about, do you have to have been that thing in order to write about the thing?
You have to be that person or whatever in order to write about that person. I just think it gives a particular kind of insight that but the part of the question also is who are the books for? Which I think is really what the publisher is concerned about. How is this particular life, this narrative life, going to get to the widest possible audience? So they're concerned about the wide audience and not this part of the audience like me over here, nerd, who was over there at the Oakland Library all those years and da 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 da. I see you didn't have the certain thing about the Oakland Library in there. You're not concerned about me at all. I bought the book. Objective obtained.
Got that wide audience. I you're very far from your own book and your own story. I'm so sorry, but you're just
I got as my mother said, I waxed professorial. I'm sorry.
No, you didn't. I went far afield. But that really like triggered a thought in my head and I just had to follow it. But I have to ask, are you going to go back to writing historical fiction romance?
At this point, probably not.
Okay.
I think I've done a certain thing in terms of historical romance. Historical romance is actually dying a slow death right now.
That hurts.
I'm sorry.
That hurts really bad.
Yeah, it is. Like even like Regency is like waning. And when I signed with my agent 4 years ago, she said, "Oh, you can independently publish whatever in terms of that." So, but now, yeah, just over the past 6 months, there has been, and people who were bestsellers who usually their books hit NYT or whatever, didn't happen this time. Everybody's noticing a certain thing happening with it. I don't know if it has to do with, like we were talking about before we came on, the population that's upcoming and their attitudes towards the history. What's going on there in terms of why the decline? I mean, and then of course you have the juggernaut that is Coho, right? I mean, I have these discussions with my niece all the time, right? It's my 22-year-old niece, who is an avid romance writer, and she's telling me about all these people I've never heard of. It's a whole different world for her.
It really is. And
so then I'm sitting there listening to her and like taking notes so I can tell my other author friends, like, have you heard of this person? These are the people who, months after I'm talking to her about them, they're hitting the New York Times.
Yes.
They're the ones who are being talked about. They're hitting USA Today or whatever. My niece told me about them. But yeah, historical fiction, unfortunately. I mean, historical romance is caught in that.
So do you think historical fiction, other than the publisher's view on what's going to be happening, is that on the rise, or is there some other genre that's on the rise that you might actually be interested in writing?
Well, what I was told in terms of me thinking about my next ideas is thinking in terms of more of historical fantasy, or what they call romantasy. This blend of romance and fantasy because of the Fourth Wing and all of this other kind of that's coming up or whatever. I have not the slightest of interest in that.
You do what you do.
That's what I'm going to do. That's just what I'm going to do. I bless it. I love it. Maybe get to read some of it or whatever, but that's not what's going to be what I'm going to be doing. So.
Can you just tell us what coho means? I feel like
Colleen Hoover.
Colleen Hoover. Yes. Yeah. I knew it. A person, not an acronym.
Yes. The phenomenon known as coho.
Yeah. So somebody also agreed with me that it does hurt that you're not going to write romance because they also love sweet tea.
Oh, thank you so much.
I mean, I think the thing is that like you're an amazing writer, so we will read what you write. It doesn't, for me, like I don't care. It just has to be written by Piper Huguley. So now I'm going to get to Patty's question about what are you working on? What is your next book? I know it's coming out in February.
In April 2nd.
Okay.
American Daughters, which is about the secret interracial friendship between Alice Roosevelt, daughter of Theodore Roosevelt, and Portia Washington, daughter of Booker T. Washington. So American Daughters is, as you people know, that history in 1901 of when Teddy gets to the White House because of McKinley being assassinated. And poor Teddy, he just thinks, oh, I'll just have Booker T. Washington over for dinner one day. And it just doesn't occur to him that the country would fall apart because he hadn't realized that a Black man had never stepped through the front door of the White House to have a meal with the president before. And in the wake of that, and this is one of the things that the book Guest of Honor talks about, was these two guys thinking about their oldest daughters who both lost their mothers at an incredibly early age. They both remarry women who resent the hell out of those daughters. What happened? And because these two young women who were less than a year apart in age, one white and one black, have a lot in common, they become friends. And they maintain a friendship that lasts until Portia's death in 1978. But my book will only cover like up until 1928-ish or whatever in terms of that. But it really provides this very interesting contrast between two people who are extremely privileged for their circumstance and racial and the decisions that they end up making or is compelled to make as young women of their time. So a lot of people write about Alice Roosevelt or have written about her in historical fiction before. She has a historical mystery series where she's the detective, etc. But it's always in line with how outrageous and crazy and rebellious and wild, but never asking that question about why and what were those psychological wounds that she suffered as a young child. And the fact that she has somebody who knows exactly how she feels in so many ways, but not able to have that be a public facing thing or a relationship. So,
Wow. How did you come up with wanting to talk about their story?
Well, we're having quite a time here. I mean, in terms of these interracial aspects, and one of the sort of research areas I've always looked at is why white authors are always willing to write about their friendships and relationships with Black women, a la The Help, for instance, but that Black authors aren't. You don't have the same numbers of those books in that way. And so this is one way in which I came to investigate that in terms of the contrast of their lives.
Just fascinating, like I said. Did you find, well, maybe we'll have to have you back in April.
Yeah, I'd love to come back in April.
And we can
May or June.
Yes. That's right, take two. Maybe we just have you back for every book you ever write again.
That's fine with me.
I do have to say, and I think I mentioned this early on, is that I had reached out to Piper for a different reason, and then she agreed to do this talk. Is Piper is also participating in our romance swag bag auction in October, and I'm going to put the link to it in the chat so you all can get a preview of it. It's romance, but there are some historical fiction writers in there. And Piper, because I just loved sweet tea so much, I was like, I need to do this. And I hadn't realized how extensively you had moved to historical fiction, but I'm so glad that in some ways that you have, because you are telling stories that we just don't hear. We just don't, they have to be put in front of us.
Yeah. And the thing about sweet tea is it's a big Easter egg. Remember, because she talks extensively, and part of that is extensively about her 3 times great grandparents. That's the story of the Preacher's Promise and the Mayor's Mission and all of that. So
yeah. I know we're about out of time, but did you know that was going to be the whole, like, that you were going to go down?
Yeah. The whole history of Milford, the town and the college, has always been something that I've had extensively thought out in my mind. So
I mean, obviously I could just keep talking to you, but I will let you go. But thank you so much for this incredible conversation, and for everybody with your questions and your comments and your good humor. I appreciate it. And
my family member who came to fluff up the audience, thank you.
Yeah, you really brought it. Well, when we have offices actually in the library, somebody's mother always comes, so don't even.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. So I appreciate the
show of support. All right, well, have a wonderful night, everybody, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Good night.